You don't belong here. The words hit Tessa Carter like a slap, their sting sharp and immediate. She had expected it, but hearing it never got easier. Standing in the middle of one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, dressed in simple clothes, with no flashy jewelry or designer bags to draw attention, she was invisible to them. Until the moment they saw her standing there. It was a test, one she had chosen to take, but the smug look on the server's face confirmed her worst fears. It was exactly what she thought it would be. She had been dismissed before, time and time again, but today she wasn't about to let it slide. She wasn't the one who didn't belong. They were. She stood there for a moment, not flinching, not backing down, letting the words hang in the air as the dining room buzzed with quiet murmurs. She could feel the eyes on her, sizing her up, judging her for her appearance. But she didn't need to prove herself. She knew who she was. The server, a woman named Emily, was not finished. "You're not even supposed to be in here," Emily said, her tone colder now, like she was reading off a script. Tessa's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained calm. "Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her voice even, like she was addressing an issue at work. "You don't have a reservation, and you look like you don't belong in this section," Emily replied, crossing her arms, trying to maintain control of the situation. Tessa didn't even flinch. "I'm sorry, is there a dress code that I wasn't made aware of?" Tessa's words were deliberate, her eyes sharp. Emily's eyes briefly flickered with uncertainty, but she quickly regained her composure. "No, it's not that. It's just," Emily trailed off, glancing at the other patrons, who were now watching the interaction. There was a brief, awkward silence before the tension in the room thickened. "This is a private dining area, and we can't have someone like you here. You don't seem like the type who could afford a meal here," Emily continued, her voice dripping with a condescending tone. Tessa felt her chest tighten with anger, but she didn't show it. She was used to this. She had spent years building her empire, navigating a world that had never quite accepted her. She knew the game they were playing. But today she wasn't going to play by their rules. Today she was going to flip the script. Tessa stood up straighter, her calm voice cutting through the tension in the air. "You're right about one thing," she said, her words carrying a quiet, yet undeniable authority. "I don't belong here. But neither do you." The room went silent. All eyes were on her now, the whispers fading away. Emily blinked, caught off guard by Tessa's response. But before Emily could say another word, Tessa calmly pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant, Daniel Moore. "Start the protocol," she said, her voice unwavering. She had been prepared for this. What Emily didn't know was that Tessa was not just a guest at this restaurant. She was the owner. And Tessa Carter wasn't about to let anyone forget that. As Tessa stood there, her phone pressed to her ear, the silence in the restaurant grew more intense. The hum of conversation had completely stopped. Every single person in the room was watching, waiting. She could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she kept her posture straight, her gaze fixed on Emily, who was still standing there, stunned and unsure of how to proceed. Tessa could hear Daniel's calm voice on the other end of the phone. "It's ready, ma'am. Just say the word." Tessa didn't need to say anything more. She knew exactly what to do next. She could feel her pulse steadying, her mind sharp as she began to execute the plan that would change everything. "Do it," she said, her voice as steady as the calm before a storm. Daniel didn't hesitate. Within moments, the systems that ran her empire were already working behind the scenes, pulling strings she had put in place long before she ever stepped into this restaurant. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air grew thicker. Emily, still holding on to her false sense of superiority, took a step toward Tessa, her eyes narrowing. "You're not fooling anyone," Emily said, her voice laced with a mixture of defiance and disbelief. "You can't just walk in here and expect to be treated like everyone else. You're out of your league." Tessa's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. The moment was slipping away from Emily, and she didn't even realize it. The game had already changed, and now Tessa held all the cards. She didn't respond to Emily's jab. Instead, she let the room's atmosphere speak for itself. One by one, the other patrons of the restaurant, who had initially been whispering behind their menus and phones, began to shift their gaze toward Tessa. It was subtle at first, just a few glances, a couple of hesitant movements. But soon enough, the realization spread like wildfire. They were all watching a woman who was not who they thought she was. Tessa could feel the shift. She could see the doubt creeping into Emily's face. She could feel the first cracks in Emily's confidence, and she knew it wouldn't be long before it all came tumbling down. And then, as if on cue, the door to the back office opened, and the restaurant manager, George Wilson, stepped out. His expression was neutral, but Tessa could see the recognition flash across his face the moment he saw her. His eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked it with a polite smile, walking over to Emily and Tessa. "Is everything all right here?" George asked, his voice smooth, but there was a tension in it now. Tessa took a deep breath and let the silence hang for a moment before she spoke, her tone carrying the full weight of authority. "There's no need to worry, George. I'm just having a small issue with your staff here. You see, I'm the owner of this restaurant," Tessa said, her words sharp and controlled. George's face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been part of the problem without even realizing it. His polite smile faltered, and his hands clenched at his sides. I didn't know," he stammered, clearly caught off guard. Tessa's voice was low but firm as she continued, "Well, now you do." The moment she finished speaking, Tessa felt the weight of the situation shift entirely. Emily was standing there, speechless, her face flushed with embarrassment as she realized the enormity of her mistake. The rest of the restaurant staff, who had been standing behind the scenes, began to appear, their eyes darting nervously between Tessa and each other. And then Tessa did something that stunned everyone in the room. She reached into her bag, pulled out her tablet, and began typing rapidly. As she did so, she spoke directly to George. "I've just begun the process of removing every single one of you from my staff," she said, her voice unwavering. "You will all be fired by the end of the day." George looked around at his colleagues, his face drained of color, and Tessa didn't give him a moment to react. "Don't worry, George," Tessa said, her smile icy. "I'm not just firing you. I'm making sure this place is under new management." Immediately, she pressed send on her tablet, and in an instant, the restaurant system began to log the changes. Tessa had already set everything in motion, and there was no turning back. The entire staff, who had so eagerly judged her, now found themselves caught in the web of their own arrogance. Tessa stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the room, and she could feel the shift in the atmosphere as every person there began to realize the true power of the woman they had so carelessly dismissed. Ironically, the room seemed to calm down after Tessa's declaration. The tension, thick and palpable just moments before, now hung in the air like a quiet storm. Emily stood frozen, staring at Tessa, her mind scrambling to process what had just happened. George, his face pale, now stood at a distance, completely unnerved. He had never imagined that the woman he had so carelessly dismissed could be the very one holding the fate of the entire restaurant in her hands. Tessa's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos she had just set in motion, and in that moment it became clear to everyone in the room. This was no ordinary confrontation. This was power in its rawest form. "You think this is a game?" Tessa's voice broke through the silence, cutting through the room with precision. Emily's lips trembled, but no words came out. "You think you can treat people like this because of the way they look?" Tessa continued, her eyes locked onto Emily's. The whole room was now silent, the once busy dining space now consumed by the gravity of the situation. Every person in the room could feel the weight of Tessa's words, as if they themselves were being judged for their own assumptions and biases. Slowly, Tessa turned her attention to the other staff members who had gathered nearby, watching with a mix of fear and disbelief. "You will all leave," Tessa said, her voice steady. "Not just Emily. All of you. You'll pack up your things and leave the restaurant by the end of the day. No questions asked." Her words hung in the air. Not a request, but an undeniable command. Tessa didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to command the room. A few moments passed before a low murmur began to rise among the patrons, some of whom had been silently observing the entire exchange. Tessa could hear them whispering, a mix of surprise and admiration in their voices. They had witnessed the shift in power, and they knew who had won. "This isn't how things are supposed to go," George finally spoke, his voice weak. He looked at Emily, then back at Tessa, trying to piece together a response. But Tessa wasn't interested in excuses. "No," she said, her tone colder than ever. "This is exactly how things should go." She turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "People like you," Tessa began. "People who think they have the right to judge others based on their appearance, their clothing, or their race. You don't get to have control over me. Not anymore." Emily's eyes flickered, her face flushing with shame. She had assumed, just like so many others, that Tessa didn't belong. But now she was faced with the harsh reality. She had been wrong. She had misjudged a person who was not only more powerful than she could have ever imagined, but also someone who had the will to stand up and demand respect. "You know," Tessa continued, "I didn't come here looking for a fight, but I will never tolerate this kind of treatment. Not now, not ever." She stepped closer to Emily, her eyes now softer but filled with unyielding resolve. "This restaurant will no longer stand as a place where people are judged based on who they are. Not under my watch." The room was still. Every eye fixed on Tessa. They could feel the power shift once more. And this time it wasn't just the staff who were shaken. It was the entire atmosphere of the restaurant. The air had changed. What had once been a high-end exclusive dining spot had now become the setting of a public reckoning. Tessa stood, poised and powerful, in the center of it all. Her gaze swept over the room, and in that moment she knew she had made her mark. She had not only taken control of her own situation, but she had also set the stage for something far greater: the dismantling of a system built on assumptions and prejudice. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked toward the door. As she passed through the restaurant, she could hear the whispers behind her, the patrons now acknowledging the true source of power in the room. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. She was Tessa Carter, and that was enough. Tessa stepped out of the restaurant, her footsteps measured and deliberate, each one echoing in the marble-floored foyer. She could feel the weight of the room behind her, the weight of their expectations and their judgment. But she didn't need to look back. She had already won. As she walked toward the exit, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Daniel. "Protocol complete. The system has been updated. All staff members have been removed. It's done." Tessa smiled, her lips curling slightly as she read the message. The process had been smooth, just as she had planned. The people who thought they had power were now powerless. The world was about to see who truly held the reins. As she reached the door, she paused for a moment, looking back over her shoulder at the restaurant. It wasn't the building that held power. It wasn't the staff, the exclusive guests, or the luxury surroundings. It was the decision she had just made, the decision to not let them control her. She stepped outside into the crisp air, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, and for the first time that day she exhaled. She was free. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Tessa had made her point, but she wasn't done. Not yet. She needed to make sure that the lesson was learned not just by the people in that restaurant, but by everyone who thought they could judge others based on assumptions. She walked toward her car, her mind already racing with the next steps. The power she had just wielded was only the beginning. She had plans, big plans, that would make sure no one ever underestimated her again. She could already feel the shift happening. She could already see the headlines. Black CEO shuts down discriminatory restaurant. Powerful businesswoman fires entire staff after racist incident. These were the words that would spread across news outlets and social media. And as much as she didn't care for the attention, she knew it was necessary. People needed to see this. They needed to understand that the world was changing. People needed to see what real power looked like. As she got into her car, Tessa dialed Daniel again. "Prepare for the next phase," she said, her voice calm but full of purpose. "I want everything aligned. We start making moves tomorrow." She hung up before he could respond, already thinking about the next steps. She had made her move. Now it was time to make sure the world knew that this kind of injustice would not be tolerated. Not now, not ever. Tessa woke up early the next morning, the crisp morning light streaming through her window. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder of the power she had activated. The staff at the restaurant had been dismissed, their arrogance replaced with uncertainty. But that was just the beginning. She knew that the ripple effect of her actions would reach far beyond that one establishment. She had made her move, but now it was time to ensure that change would follow. Her mind was already working through the next phase, strategizing how she would continue her mission to dismantle systems of judgment and prejudice. As she got out of bed, she dressed in a simple yet purposeful outfit, a tailored black blazer, a white blouse, and sleek pants. It was her signature style, understated but powerful. She wanted to show the world that she didn't need to wear a crown to command attention. She had everything she needed right here: her intelligence, her resilience, and her ability to move mountains when necessary. After a quick breakfast, she settled into her home office, the room filled with the quiet hum of activity. Daniel's message was waiting for her. The changes have been implemented across the board. The news is already circulating about the incident. Tessa didn't need to ask how. She knew that once the story hit the airwaves, it would spread like wildfire. Perfect, she typed back. Get the team ready. We're making the next move today. She set the phone down and took a deep breath. The world was watching. The media had already begun to report the story of a black CEO firing an entire restaurant staff after a racist incident. The story was gaining traction, and Tessa's name was quickly becoming synonymous with power and justice. But she knew that the media buzz would fade unless she kept the pressure on. The moment she made her first move, it became clear to her that the game had changed. People were starting to see the truth, that she was not someone to be dismissed, not someone to be underestimated. She had worked for this moment, built her empire with blood, sweat, and countless hours of work. Now she was using that power to shift the balance. She wasn't just taking a stand for herself. She was taking a stand for anyone who had ever been looked down upon because of their race, gender, or appearance. Tessa sat down at her desk and picked up the phone. This time she wasn't calling Daniel. She dialed a number she hadn't called in years, the number of a former colleague, Rachel Morrison, who had once been a powerful ally in the corporate world. Rachel answered on the second ring. Tessa, she said, her voice warm with familiarity. I saw the news. You've done something amazing. Tessa smiled slightly. Thanks, Rachel. But this is just the beginning. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then Rachel spoke again, this time with more caution in her voice. What's next? Tessa paused for a moment, thinking carefully. Next, we make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. I'm going to use this platform to make a real difference. It's time to dismantle the systems that allow this type of discrimination to thrive. Rachel's voice softened, but there was a note of admiration in it. I'm in. Whatever you need, Tessa. You've got my support. Tessa's eyes gleamed with determination. I knew I could count on you, Rachel. I'm going to take this to the next level. She hung up the phone, feeling a sense of clarity settle over her. The path ahead was clear. She wasn't just going to make a statement. She was going to build something that would change the game forever. Tessa stood up, walked over to the window and looked out at the city below. She had already proven her strength, but now it was time to show the world the full scope of her vision. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a force to be reckoned with. Tessa sat in her office, staring at the screen in front of her. The emails, the messages, the headlines. Everything was beginning to flood in. The world was watching. She had expected this, but now that it was happening, she felt an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. She had made her point, and the momentum she had created was unstoppable. Her phone buzzed again. It was Daniel. The media is calling it a game-changing moment. Your name's everywhere. People are asking for interviews. Tessa smiled, but her expression remained focused. I'm not interested in interviews, Daniel. Not yet. We have bigger things to focus on. Daniel's voice came through the phone, a mix of respect and curiosity. What's next then? Tessa leaned back in her chair, her mind already working through the next phase of her plan. Next, we take this momentum and push for real change. I'm not just going to be a headline. I'm going to be the one who rewrites the rules. I've got people I trust, people with the same vision, and I'm going to gather them. She paused, letting the words sink in. We're going to build something from the ground up. A foundation. Something that lasts. Daniel was silent for a moment, then replied with determination. I'm in. What do we need to do? I need you to reach out to a few key people. Let them know I'm ready to start this. The people who can actually make a difference. Tessa's eyes glinted with a quiet fire. We're going to change. The way this world operates. One system at a time. As she spoke, her mind was already formulating the structure of what would come next. She didn't want a quick win. She wanted lasting change, and she knew that would take time and strategy. But she was patient. She had built her empire with patience, with careful planning. Now it was time to do it again, but this time the stakes were higher. She wasn't just dismantling the restaurant industry. She was looking at an entire system. Tessa turned her gaze to the city outside her office window. The world was changing, and she was going to be the one to drive it forward. Get the ball rolling, Daniel. We start today, she said, her voice unwavering. After hanging up, Tessa stood up from her desk and walked to the window. She watched as the city hummed with life below, unaware of the shift that was about to happen. It was time to put the power back in the hands of the people who deserved it. It wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. It was about making sure that no one would ever feel the way she did in that restaurant ever again. She would be the one to make sure of that. As Tessa left her office, she felt a surge of energy. The pieces were all falling into place. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a force. And now the world would see exactly what that meant. Tessa sat back in her chair, staring at the screen in front of her. The first phase of her plan had worked flawlessly. News outlets were buzzing with the story of the restaurant incident. Headlines were everywhere. Her name was being talked about across the country. But she knew this was just the beginning. She wasn't just going to let the world remember her for one moment of bold action. No, this was going to be bigger than that. Much bigger. She needed to build something lasting, something that would shift the foundation of how businesses and systems operated. She didn't want to be another headline. She wanted to be the force behind the transformation. As she picked up her phone, she dialed Rachel's number. Tessa, Rachel answered almost immediately, her voice steady but tinged with excitement. I saw the coverage. You've really shaken things up. Tessa smiled slightly. This is just the start, Rachel. We're going to do more than just shake things up. We're going to tear down the walls they've built. Rachel's voice was eager. I'm all in. What do you need from me? I need you to organize a summit, Tessa said, her tone decisive. We're going to bring together the most influential people, the ones who can actually make change happen. We need allies in the business world, the legal world, and in the media. I want them all there. Rachel paused for a moment, processing. A summit? You're serious about this? I'm not just serious.
I'm committed, Tessa replied.
We're going to use this momentum to build a network of people who understand what needs to change and who are willing to do something about it. This is the moment we move from just talking to actually making a difference. Tessa could hear Rachel's approval on the other end of the line. I'll get started on it right away. You know I'll make it happen. Good, Tessa said, her mind already racing through the logistics. And I want this summit to be held within the next few weeks. The world needs to see that we're not wasting time. I'm going to make sure they know we mean business. As she hung up the phone, Tessa felt the weight of her words settle over her. She wasn't just going to build a network. She was going to create a movement. The thought energized her. She stood up from her desk, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. This city had once been a place where people like her were overlooked, dismissed, and told they didn't belong. But now everything was about to change. She wasn't just a woman fighting for respect. She was a woman who had the power to reshape the systems that had held people down for so long. And she was going to do it. She would gather her allies, bring them together, and create something that couldn't be ignored. Something that would outlast any headline. Something that would last for generations. The world would never forget her name, but more importantly, it would never forget the change she was about to ignite. Tessa Carter was no longer just a CEO. She was a force of nature. And now the world would see exactly what that meant. Tessa arrived at the venue for the summit, her mind still racing with the thoughts of the last few days. She had made the call, and now the wheels were turning. She could feel the gravity of what she was about to do, but there was no fear. She was ready. She had known from the start that this wasn't going to be easy, but she was prepared for it. As she stepped into the room, she was met with the hum of quiet conversations, the soft rustle of business suits, and the murmur of anticipation. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the subtle tension in the air. People were watching. People were waiting. But she wasn't intimidated. She wasn't here to prove herself to anyone. She was here to make a statement. She walked to the front of the room, where a large screen displayed her name in bold letters. The people gathered there, some of the most influential figures in business, law, and media, turned their attention toward her as she approached the podium. She took a moment to glance at the crowd, scanning the faces of those who had been brought together. This was her moment, the one she had been working toward. And now it was time to show them what she was made of. "Thank you all for being here," Tessa began, her voice steady and strong. "You are all here today because you know that the world needs to change. You know that the systems in place are broken, and you understand that it is up to us to fix them." Her words were met with nods of agreement, but Tessa didn't stop there. She wasn't here to just talk. She was here to lead. "I've lived a lifetime of being told that I didn't belong, that I wasn't enough, that the color of my skin, the way I dressed, the way I spoke, all of it made me other. And I know that many of you have experienced the same." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But here's the thing. I'm done being told I don't belong. I'm done letting anyone else decide my worth. And I know that you are too." She could feel the energy shift in the room, the collective realization that something big was happening, something real. "We are not here to talk about the problems," she continued. "We are here to talk about the solutions. We are here to build something that lasts, something that is built on equality, respect, and fairness for everyone, no matter their race, gender, or background." The room was silent now, the weight of her words settling in. "We are here because we know that the world has been broken for far too long. And we are here because we believe that we can fix it." Tessa took a deep breath, her confidence unwavering. She had come so far, but this was just the beginning. Today we start building the future. Today we stop letting people like us be pushed aside. We take back the power. Together. She looked out over the room, her gaze meeting the eyes of the people who had come to support her cause. She saw the respect in their eyes, the understanding of what was at stake. She wasn't just leading this movement. She was the movement. And as the room erupted in applause, Tessa knew that this was the start of something monumental. The change was happening and she was at the helm. Tessa stood at the front of the room, the applause slowly fading as she allowed the weight of the moment to settle in. The energy in the room was palpable, and she could feel the excitement and determination in the air. This was more than just a summit, this was the birth of a movement. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, facing challenges and obstacles that many of her peers never had to deal with. But it was moments like these that proved why she was here. Not because of luck, but because of her relentless drive and unwavering belief that change was not only possible but necessary. The faces in the room were a mix of awe and admiration. There were those who had watched her rise to the top, knowing she had the power to disrupt industries. And then there were those who had never heard her name before today but were now seeing the kind of leader she truly was. This wasn't about personal gain anymore. It was about creating a world where people like her, people who had been told they didn't belong, would never feel that way again. She wasn't going to let the systems of oppression continue. Not on her watch. Not anymore. She stepped away from the podium, feeling the weight of the responsibility she had just taken on. But it didn't scare her. It fueled her. As she walked off the stage, the crowd slowly began to disperse, many of them approaching her, eager to connect, to be part of the change. She exchanged a few words with some of the key figures in the room, making plans, forming alliances. But Tessa's mind was already moving forward. She wasn't just a CEO. She was now a symbol of something bigger, a catalyst for a revolution. And she would not rest until that revolution had taken root and spread across every industry, every sector, every system that perpetuated inequality. As she made her way toward the exit, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was just the beginning. She knew there would be challenges ahead, obstacles that would try to pull her back, but she was ready. The fire within her had been lit, and nothing could extinguish it. She stepped out into the evening air, the city lights reflecting off the glass buildings,